All right, good evening. City of Plymouth Planning Commission meeting for Thursday, March 7th, 2024 is now called to order. Members of the public not attending in person may submit written public comment prior to the meeting by emailing your comment to the Planning Commission Secretary at dnight@cityofplymouth.org before 3:30 p.m. on the day of the meeting. Email public comments will be distributed to the commission and made part of the official record. This meeting will be recorded. Council chambers are wheelchair accessible. Special accommodations may be requested by contacting the commission secretary 72 hours in advance of the meeting. Please silence all cell phones or similar devices. And can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Kozart.
Present.
Commissioner Beeson is absent tonight. Commissioner Mickleton.
Here.
Oh, sorry, I have that wrong. Commissioner Claproth,
Here.
Vice Chair Sullivan,
Present.
and Chair Mickelson.
And yes.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Please stand for the pledge of allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen.
Okay, item 2 is the approval of the Planning Commission regular meeting agenda for Thursday, March 7th, 2024. And asking for a motion.
I'll move that we approve the planning commission regular meeting agenda for March 7th, 2024.
Second. And can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Kozart,
Yes.
Commissioner Claproth,
Yes.
Vice Chair Sullivan,
Yes.
Chair Mickelson.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
All right, item 3, public comment. Under the provisions of the California Code, citizens wishing to address the commission for any matter not on the agenda may do so at this time by completing and submitting a speaker submittal form to the Planning Commission Secretary or following the instructions noted on this agenda. Speakers will be called by the chair at the point on the agenda when the item will be heard. Speakers should keep comments to 3 minutes or less and state their name and community of residence. Under provisions of the California Government Code, the commission is prohibited from materially discussing or taking action on any item not on the agenda unless it can be demonstrated to be of an emergency nature or an urgent need to take immediate action arose after the posting of the agenda. At this point, anybody have any public comments? Any speaker cards, Stan?
Have not received any, no.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to number 4, which is presentation and appointment. 4.1, receive presentation regarding general plan amendments and rezones. And with that, I will turn it over to Erica Grace.
Shared screens.
Of course, I'm blind, you couldn't see, you were confirmed.
It's a PDF, so I think you just scroll.
Oh, that's what it, okay.
Yep,
Okay,
sorry.
sorry. For a brief just discussion tonight, the planning department thought it might be helpful to have a discussion of what is a general plan amendment and what is a rezone. You're likely gonna have a few come before you this year. So prior to that, so there's no questions at the meeting and you're aware of the procedure, it's just a very brief discussion of what they are. For general plan amendments, that can be undertaken by the city, or by an applicant. A mandatory element of the general plan can only be amended 4 times per year. And what that means is, your land use element is the most likely to be modified during a year. A person might want their designation change, if someone annexes into the city, that requires a city limit line change, potentially some other changes to the general plan. So you're only limited for per calendar year. Some cities require that general plan amendments all be compiled together and then they only occur 4 times per year. If that situation arose in the city where we started seeing more, we'd probably start limiting them to 4 quarters per year so that we can have the 4 if we need them. But you haven't had very many in the last couple of years. It was just this year where we thought we were going to have potentially more than. General plan amendments are reviewed by the planning commission during a public hearing. The planning commission makes a recommendation to the city council. The city council then reviews it during a public hearing of their own. If the city council for some reason decided to make substantial changes to a general plan amendment request, for example, I don't know, they requested a higher density residential and the city council said, we're not comfortable with that, we'd like you to go to medium density. It would have to go back to the planning commission and be reviewed again, so it will go through the process. General plan amendments do typically require CEQA review because you're typically changing the land use and that is subject to CEQA. If the city council made a substantial change and that change wasn't covered under the CEQA document, it would have to be done again. Once the general plan amendment is adopted, you do need to amend the general plan land use map and the general plan if necessary. For some reason, we're changing the policy. And then post it in the places where people can find them. So on our website and here at City Hall. A rezone is a little different. A rezone again can be initiated by a city or an applicant. A city, as part of their housing element, may choose to upzone some properties or change some designations of some properties. That would be a city initiated rezone. You would also have to go through with the general plan. Because a rezone must be consistent with the general plan. And what I mean by that is if the general plan land use designation was commercial and a person came in and requested residential, those two don't go together. The general plan also has to be amended to residential to conform to that rezone that they're requesting. And you take them both at the same time together. Again, this one is processed in the same manner as a general plan amendment, which is planning commission first, city council second. But a rezone is actually adopted by ordinance. So what that means is there's the first reading at the council meeting. If the council were to approve it, they do their first reading. Then there's a second reading. It doesn't take effect for 30 days until after that second reading. So there's a little bit more of a lag time with them with the general plan.
Can they be done kind of at the same time, or is this?
So you would want to do them at the same time, and this is why, because if I'm going to amend the general plan land use designation for a property and it doesn't match the zoning, that's not consistent with state law. Likewise, same with rezoning, so they do go together. There is a chance, there could be a situation where it's designated as just commercial in a general plan, and there's varying kinds of commercial zoning districts within a city, and you'd still be consistent, but you wanted a different list of uses that would be allowed on your property. So you would just have a rezone. A rezone really from an applicant, and the same with the general plan, is really to change what they're allowed to do on their property. So maybe I own a property and it's zoned for standard residential, and I say, I would really like to have a restaurant on my property. Can't do that with your single family residential zoning, so you would come into the city and request that rezone. It is discretionary, so if someone smack dab in the middle of a single family residential wanted to put an industrial property, the city has ultimate discretion on whether they want to do that, and you can take into consideration both environmental impacts and impacts to the surrounding. So you're not required to say yes. Again, CEQA review is typically required for both situations. There is one exception, and it comes from state law. So if you were to downzone a property, so if it's high density residential and for some reason you're downzoning it to single family residential, that doesn't trigger CEQA because the impacts would be less. And there is something called Senate Bill 10, and Senate Bill 10 allows a city to exempt CEQA review from a residential project or rezoning to a residential use that would allow no more than 10 dwelling units. So an infill exemption doesn't technically fall, an infill exemption doesn't qualify under a rezone, but in this case, the state has acknowledged that we do need more housing. So what they're saying is, as long as you're rezoning and there's no more than 10 houses, CEQA does not apply. You could if you wanted to, but in most cases it doesn't. So that's the end of general plan amendment and reasons. I don't know if you have any more questions on that.
Go ahead.
So you mentioned you can only do four a year, is that like? In one of those four, there could be a couple, or is it just four?
It's 4 times per year. You can have as many as you want in one.
Oh, okay.
So there could be, I guess, 100 technically in one if you had them. I can't see that happening in this city, but I don't know. But yeah, it's 4 times per year. It's just, the general plan is meant to be a long-range planning tool, and if you are trying to amend it every month, then it's telling you that your document needs to be looked at.
Thank you. And then my question is just, I mean, it's kind of 2 questions, but I'll give two all in one. So you said the city can decide to do some of this stuff, or an applicant can do it. What's the process for each? Like, how would that look?
It's the same process for each, so. Let's say we were reviewing our general plan goals in the land use section and a couple of them weren't working for us. So staff requests some minor amendments. We're the applicant, the city, and it still comes before you, and then it goes before the planning commission, and even though it's city initiated, you could still, if I brought you an amendment, you could still tell me no. It's still discretionary, even if staff's requesting it. If a person wanted to initiate their own general plan amendment, they're gonna apply to the city, they submit an application form, they pay the application fee. If CEQA is required, they're paying for that. It's a longer process once CEQA becomes involved, because it takes time to write those documents. So you are looking at a year plus on something like that before they hit here.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Do you remember one more time that it was like, there's a reading and a second reading?
Oh, okay.
What is that?
So anytime anything is adopted by ordinance, so a rezone, ADU ordinance, when we write it, it's adopted by ordinance. So it goes before the city council and they make their decision. That's called, if they approve it, that's called the first reading. But it's not a done deal, because then it goes to second reading. Second reading usually appears on the consent calendar at the following meeting, and then they have to adopt it again. And then 30 days after that, it takes effect. So if we pass, the city council had a second reading tomorrow to, I don't know, change the setbacks for your front setbacks, it doesn't take effect for 30 days. So it's not enforceable. We can't use it until that 30-day deadline.
Thank you, Erica. That was very helpful. Appreciate it. Yeah, any public comment on this information? Okay, we're gonna move on to item 5, which is the consent calendar items. All matters listed on the consent calendar are to be considered routine and will be enacted by one motion. If discussion is required, that particular item will be removed from the consent calendar and will be considered separately. On the consent calendar on 5.1, we have the approval of the Planning Commission regular meeting minutes of January 18th, 2024. Is there any public comment on the consent calendar? Yeah, any further comment? We have a motion.
I'll move that we approve the consent calendar.
Second.
And can we have a roll call, please?
I'll second that.
All right, Commissioner Kozart,
Yes.
For the consent.
Yeah, that was me. Sorry.
Give them a yes or no.
Are you approving the consent calendar?
What's that?
Approving the consent calendar?
Yes.
There we
I
go.
said I approved that.
All right.
I'm sorry.
You're perfect.
Didn't ring through good.
That's okay, Commissioner Clapperroth,
Yes.
Vice Chair Sullivan,
Yeah, yes.
Chair Mickelson.
Yes.
Thank you, motion passes.
Okay, item 6, public hearings, we have none. Item 7, unfinished business, we have none. Item 8, new business. 8.1. Which is to receive a presentation regarding density bonus law and provide direction to staff regarding possible ordinance changes. And with that, Erica, you're up again.
It's me again. This one is a lot more complicated than the last one, so feel free to interrupt me at any moment. Density bonus is a tool that allows a developer to seek a density bonus in exchange for donating land, building a childcare facility, or building affordable housing. The density increase is an increase over the density that is allowed in the general plan or the zoning ordinance. In addition to the density bonus, a city is required to provide one or more incentives based on the percentage of the site that is affordable. And this comes out of state law, so this is something that is you have to do. In exchange for providing some of these incentives, the city does get affordable housing, and very low and low income designated units are required by the state to be restricted for 55 years. There is no restricted period for moderate income units. That is at the city's discretion. So you could, if in the ordinance, the city could elect whatever number of years that they want to do, up to 55, the same as very low. A city can require a housing agreement between the city and the developer, a deed restriction, or other tool to ensure that the units stay affordable for that specific period, yes.
So if you did a deed restriction or whatever, who enforces that? I mean, who's ultimately responsible?
Ultimately, the city is responsible for it. What I personally prefer is both the housing agreement and the deed restriction, because the housing agreement, you know, goes between both the city and the applicant. It can outline things such as how you qualify people, or are they just gonna select a qualified person that picks the people that are qualified for that income level. You can kind of outline that program in there. I love a deed restriction because when someone goes to buy something, they are aware that there is a deed restriction on that property. So for example, if the affordable development was single family residential and I have an affordable unit and then I just go try to sell it at market rate, that deed restriction is going to notify that this is a restricted unit. I like both as a tool for protecting the city and protecting that unit to make sure it's affordable.
So say you get both of those in place, right, and somebody's violating it. Is there an ordinance that comes in that we say you're violating this ordinance, or is it just a contractual civil case where the city then sues the people?
Yes,
Number two, it's
yes.
yeah, it's a lawsuit basically.
It's, what is helpful to the city is both, it was approved as a density bonus project, right? So the state also says you are restricted for this many years. A housing agreement in place that says, I promise, and future property owners promise. And you have that deed restriction that also ties it to that year. And the deed restriction remains in place until someone actually requests to remove it. So after the 55 years, it could still potentially be there. It should have a sunset date.
Got it.
And then it would automatically turn into market value after.
And then you could automatically sell it at market value. So if I bought a single family home for a very low income, and after 5 years, I decided, I don't know, I want to move to a different state, and I go to sell it, I have to find a qualified person to buy my house that meets the income qualifications, can provide all the requirements that are within the housing agreement, and I sell to them, and that is how they get sold.
So if you built it in like 1969, you're off the hook with this right now. That's like what you're saying, basically.
State density bonus has significantly changed over the years. your ordinance was last adopted in 2014, and the state changes them every year, and significantly so in the last 5 years, the rules have really been changing. Whereas it was kind of a thing where no one ever did it before, it now is more of an incentive for developers, so more developers want to use it, but it also gives us that 55 years. Which is a nice enforcement tool for us, because I can say it's affordable, I can sell it to an affordable person, and then what happens in 10 years, under the old laws, it was much more different and difficult for a city. So this is essentially what the density bonus is, and it's by target group. So if I am building a complex and I'm gonna restrict some of the units to very low income, I have to have a minimum of 5% to qualify for a density bonus. Low income is 10%, moderate income is 10%. Senior housing is 100%, and then there's 100% affordable housing projects. So that's the minimum to qualify for a density bonus. The amount of density bonus that you are granted, which is the number of units above what the general plan allows, again, goes up incrementally based on the number of units you're giving us. So at 5% for very low, you get a 20% bonus, but then it starts going up 2.5%, each time you're adding a percentage on. So it can go up quite high, it does get capped. So for an example, if you had a 10-acre parcel and you're in our standard residential zoning district, and you decide to give us 5% of very low, you get a 20% density bonus increase. Now, on a 10-acre parcel, you get those 48 dwelling units. But now if I'm a developer and I give the city 5%, designate 5% of the base units for affordable housing, I get to add on 10 units. So I've now exceeded that max general plan cap of 48 by 10 units. And as you can see, with all the income categories, there's the potential to add. So if I go to 15% very low, I get a 50% bonus. I get to add on 24 units. So if I didn't give any affordable housing, I get 48 units. If I give affordable housing, I now get 72. So you can significantly increase that density. 50% is the max of that bonus category.
And that's required, so if that happens.
That's required by the state. You cannot say anything as long as they meet the requirements of the state. So as long as they're providing that very low income housing and the percentages required, the state says you have to approve it, you cannot deny it.
So like in that 10-acre, 48 unit, they could get an additional. 4.8, so almost 10 units.
Yeah. So you could go anywhere from 10 extra units up to 24 extra units above that maximum density. Now, the developer is not required to actually give extra units. You can provide affordable housing and not go after extra units if you wanted to do so. So I could be a developer and I'm putting in, let's say my max density is 48, but I decide I only want 40 units and I'm gonna give 5% to very low. I can still do that and qualify for density bonus. And there's a reason why they'll do it, and we'll go over it in a second, but you are not ultimately required to elect an increase in density. And you're not ultimately, even if you went for the increase in density, you don't have to take that extra amount if you didn't want to do so. It's entirely up to them. So what I see most developers choosing to go forward with is the incentives or concessions. And what that is an eligible project is based on their percentage that they're providing. They may be allowed anywhere between 1 and 4 incentives. One of the incentives is a reduction in all the development standards for that property. So what that means is whatever the zoning ordinance tells you that the rules are for that property, so if you pick the village residential, and you, as the developer, determine that you do not want to follow the setbacks at all, you are not required to do it, you can use that as an incentive. Cities used to be able to require a pro forma where you would explain in great detail why that incentive would lower your costs. That is no longer allowed anymore. If they say it lowers costs, that's all they have to prove for that incentive. So I typically have process density bonuses where it is a complete waiver of all setbacks and they select their own. You can get more houses on, it changes the affordability for the project. And thereby allowing them to provide additional units.
So just a quick question back, it's like the 48 unit example, so they didn't increase the number of units, they continued with 48. They elected for 5% very low income, so 2 to 3 of those units would need to be designated as.
Yeah. So if it's an apartment complex, they're gonna tell us which 2 units are designated for affordability, and they're gonna tell us what it is, right? And so on a plan, they will show me where they are located, and those are the ones that will stay as affordable for 55 years. And then because they have done this, they can select, if they wanted to as their incentive, they can select a reduction of development standards. And one thing that's important to note is it's development standards. So if they say a front and a side setback, that still counts as 1. If they say all my setbacks plus lot coverage, that still counts as 1. It's the waiver of development standards in any way that they choose to do so, that counts as 1 incentive. It's a very attractive incentive. And that's why developers will provide affordable housing, because it makes their project a little bit more feasible sometimes.
And then just for my clarification, it is up to the developer to decide whether they want the bonus units or incentives. The city
They
can.
get both, They can elect not to use any of them. They can elect to use both of them. It's entirely up to them. A second incentive that someone could request is a mixed use, or mixed use might not otherwise be allowed. So first floor commercial, second floor and on up is residential to offset the cost of the residential. They can request other regulatory incentives such as street width, sidewalks, other sorts of regulatory requirements that we have, still have to meet safety. There's some things that we can do there. And then they can request a direct financial contribution. So a developer could request the waiver of impact fees, a waiver of permit fees, whatever they chose to select as being necessary. Now, the waiver of a fee requires council approval. And there's a little bit more burden on why. They can't just say, I want my fees waived because it makes sense to me. They have to give us more information in that case, because it requires the city to either offset an impact fee with the general fund, the waiver of an application fee means that staff's time is now not being they're not paying for their project in a sense. The city is picking up the cost of the processing, but that is something else that they can request. And projects do get, depending on how their percentage of affordable housing, they get anywhere from 1 to 4 incentives. So you can see a number of incentive requests within a project.
And it also helps, if say they opted for that, it will help the city meet our needs standards too. Right?
It does, yes. So if someone gives us affordable units, obviously that goes into our arena numbers where we can use to show that we are providing for.
Do they come in and try to mix the applications so that they can ride the windstorm of one by addressing some of the others on that portion? Because it looks like they might be able to try to modify how it's being presented by some of the wording that they're using in here. Is that a problem, or is that something that we try to just block out?
So anyone who's coming in obviously has to meet the state law. And right now, your ordinance is not up to date, so we can't use it at all. So we're gonna have to follow, if someone came in tomorrow, we have to follow state law. And whatever they're doing, it has to completely be consistent or they don't qualify, they can't use it. Now, their request for a density bonus goes along with their request for whatever else they're doing, so. Their design review, there's a tentative map, I don't know if it needed a general plan amendment or a rezone or whatever else they're doing, that all has to be reviewed as a package together. But once that density bonus comes into play, you are limited on certain things. You can't prohibit them from increasing the density if they qualify. You can't say, no, you don't get any incentives because we don't like your incentive. That is not available to you. One of the other parts of the law is you can be eligible for an extra incentive if you are going to include a childcare facility within your project area. So I have a single family residential dwelling project of, I don't know, let's say 30 units, and then you're gonna put a daycare smack dab in the center, you get an extra incentive. The incentive for the childcare facility, however, needs to be related to that construction of the childcare facility. So there are specifics such as you can increase the square footage of your project a certain amount to accommodate that childcare facility if you needed to allow it to be built. And there's other incentives, but it's related to the construction of that facility. It's not related to the rest of the development. Oops. Another possibility is affordable housing on commercial land, which is a little different. An applicant can receive a density bonus by partnering with the housing developer to construct residential dwellings in addition to a commercial development. This one has a different requirement, so it's at least 15% of the units have to be dedicated to very low income households, or 30% dedicated to low income households. So if it's commercial property, I want to build and then I want to add some commercial units, I can do that under the density bonus law, regardless of zoning, if I'm providing those percentages at a minimum of affordability.
So you could have, an applicant could have a mixed use proposal and say it's residential housing and commercial. Their incentives could apply to the commercial piece of them.
So let's take the Plymouth, the Sierra Trading Post, and I want to tear it down, and I'm going to build a. It's commercial. I'm going to build a, I don't know, 3-story building, and the first story is retail, and then my second 2 stories are residential. Residential wouldn't normally be allowed, but now because I'm going to give you affordable housing, I can do that. But I have to give you a certain percentage of affordable housing.
Yeah.
It's another tool to kind of increase affordable housing in the state. Whether or not you would see it here, I don't know, you know, something like that is in more dense cities where you see something like that where they want a mixed use and they want to put some more housing on it. But it could happen, it can happen anywhere, you just never know. So tonight we are asking for some direction on how we would like to move forward. As I mentioned, your ordinance is out of date, we can't use it at all. It's 2014, it's very out of date. We could just repeal it. And then we don't have to worry about it being in the zoning ordinance, and then we could just follow state law. Or we could amend it so that it is consistent with state law. And then if we do that, there are certain things we can put in it, such as the affordability period for moderate income housing. We can require some other things to safeguard the city. We can require the deed restriction. We can require the housing agreement. So those things are available to the city if we wanted to move forward with it. It's entirely up to you on how you'd like to do it. The city attorney did recommend that you elect to revise the ordinance. Just so that the city has more control, but again, it's entirely up to you. Right now, we can't use it. It's not a pressing matter, but it is something that if we're gonna keep it, we should start thinking about amending, and the way it's going, we will most likely have to amend it every year.
Now, I know you're not the city attorney, so no problem if you can't answer this, but is it possible to do these three items are important to us, so we're gonna put that in the ordinance and then have the ordinance state, otherwise it follows state law. I mean, can you do that so we don't have to change it every year?
You are going to have to put some of what is in. Some of it is going to have to be respelled out. I can't just fall back on the entire. Because there will be areas in which ours is more strict. We can not be as detailed. I just wrote one that's like 40 pages long because it is everything. We could be less detailed oriented. It's, the hard thing is that the state law is very difficult to read. And when you, I don't know if you took a little gander through that, it is confusing even for a planner. And so planners like to put things into plainer language, so it's easier for me, for you, for everyone. So that's why I wouldn't necessarily say completely fall back on it. What I've seen in the last 3 years is that, yes, it has to be amended every year. They are minor amendments. It's not a huge amendment, but it is looking like every year. It'll probably be amended.
I don't know about my colleagues, but I would probably lean towards actually putting it in a city ordinance, so somebody with a project or our city staff could make heads or tails out of it easily. But I think the best way to craft it is in a way that it's simple, where our main objectives are in there, but some of the other stuff may not be necessary to change every year. I think that like 40-page one, you're just asking to change 40 pages every year, right?
It's usually one tiny section. That's what gets hard. It's like one line and it gets changed. So you're changing one line in your ordinance. That's usually what happens, unless they change the percentages, which I don't think they've done in a while. I can't remember, but it's entirely up to you.
I would support that as well, like, I think at least having some elements within our control. And maybe relying on state law and restating that with our elements, but I think that makes sense for us, like, we could have more control over some of those particulars that would be important to the city.
Yeah, and I know it's obviously we got to follow state law, but I do think it's important. I'm a pretty big proponent of keeping, city ordinances, because we need to have some control as long as we follow state law, and it makes it easier for people, I think, to stick with city ordinances instead of going back and forth. It's just the same thing. I think it's here, and like you said, the way you would write it would be a lot more user friendly. Okay, is there any public comment on this presentation? Oh, good luck. Thank you. Any other comments?
If I could, I guess, get some clarification then, do you want moderate to be at 55 years, or do you want to give them a different time?
For me, and I, of course, I'll talk about as a group, but I think the 55 is probably consistent with stable, and probably should keep that, but that's just my feelings.
What are your other clients doing with that? Just out of curiosity.
55 years. Helps to bring the numbers for, much longer period, and they're getting a large incentive for these projects. The waiver of development standards is huge.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, so I guess we just need to let Eric know what we would like to see to have this happen. So is there a motion based on the consensus?
Eric, do you have all your questions answered, or was the 55 your main one, or what else?
I don't know, 55 years, you want to do require housing agreement?
I think so.
I would agree with that.
Deed restriction,
Yeah, I like kind of the way you presented that, of just having all of those things, because enforcement's a problem here with the city, obviously, because we don't have the resources to go out. So all the avenues we have to keep people on track are probably that's.
And then the density bonus for childcare facility. I would recommend that the ordinance includes a requirement that the childcare facility come through at the same time as the project. You could elect to be nicer if you wanted to delay it, but. You know, I would like to move forward on that.
Yeah, I think that you're, that's.
That's all my questions. If we are moving forward with the ordinance, then we bring it back for a study session, so you guys can look at it before we get too far down the road.
Then we'll need a motion right there.
Can we just do consensus?
I think, yeah, consensus is fine.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we're just directing city staff to explore.
Yeah.
At this point, right, based on those.
To explore it, we will draft something. It'll take a little while because we do have ADUs too. And then you would see in a study session so you can read through it before. I wouldn't want to take something like this to prepare it. Intense.
Okay, we're gonna move on to 8.2, which is a future study session. Staff is. This is discussion of future study session topics. And I wonder who's up on this one.
I wonder. So this is one we just wanted to get some feedback from you on. I know at one meeting, there was some discussion later on in the meeting about what sort of topics you wanted staff to kind of bring forward to study as such an item, just for informational purposes. One of them was LAFCO and annexation procedures. We talked about that last time. Staff had added on ADUs as a discussion. There were some other items that you had briefly mentioned in that list, and so we came up with a couple of things based on what you said, and then maybe some other things. It's just really, what do you want to learn about next, and what's the priority? So some of the things that we came up with is what is a conditional use permit and how are they reviewed? And what the noticing requirements are for that. What happens after an environmental document is written? So once the mitigated next deck is written, what happens after that? I know you had a discussion before about what is CEQA, and there was a request for more information on what happens when it's actually done. What do we do? Another topic is Senate Bill 9, and that's 2-unit residential development and lot splits that the state now requires for single family residences. There's the Housing Accountability Act, which limits the city saying no to housing and limits how you can say no. And if there's anything else you wanted to learn about, let me know. But I think what we're just trying to get is a consensus of what do you want to learn about next, what's the priority, and what are some other topics you might like us to bring.
Open it up for discussion.
Yeah, I think these are good. I would say, I think the process after an environmental document is prepared would be important. Given things that may come to us, I'm trying to think of what we prioritize given what may come this year.
Yeah.
And then like the housing accountability, limiting saying no, like I think that's important unless we have a residential or a housing.
And then, I would like to know about general plan updates. I've heard that from around a lot, that our general plan hasn't been updated in a long time, just kind of what that process is all about,
So you mean like a new general plan?
or whatever,
Because your every general plan has a sunset date.
right?
So I think you're coming up.
Yeah, and that's why.
And what is the
that's
general plan update process?
Yeah, how's that all? I mean, that's coming up, we probably should start thinking about it, so I'd love to know more about what that process is.
Okay.
Mel, is there anything you would like to see in the future?
I was just reviewing some of this breakdown that we're discussing on how it's going to affect different things. And I think it's laid out pretty nice in our documentation. I could follow the heading of what we were discussing with the breakdown that they've got in the breakdown, and it just fell right in place. So I was really happy that it gave me the overview and then the details as it went into each progress section. So I was really happy that we had laid out.
I don't not, but I'll second that sentiment that you guys do a good job of these things, and I appreciate it.
And I'm gonna defer it. Say that these study sessions are very important for us, for the community, so I really appreciate you taking your time and explaining it to us. And every time we hear and I actually learn more about it, so I do appreciate that. You know, in reality, I agree with what everybody says about the order, but all of these are very important to us, and so, but I think the order that we've kind of, the consensus we came to, I totally agree.
If there's no, I mean, if we're just using this list with the general plan update, what I would recommend is environmental review first, because there is an M&D out for ARCO. There's tribal casino M&D, so there are things that are out there. Eventually we have 49er Village, so it's probably good to do that first. We could go to general plan updates after that. And then we would probably do housing accountability act with, I don't know, like one or two others together. It shouldn't be that one shouldn't be too long because basically the state just limits itself, so.
I think that's a great plan.
Great.
And then if there's more after that, we can add on more. If there's something comes up in between and you want more information because we brought something before you, we can just throw it in and we'll put that on the list.
And as far as public comment, is there anybody the audience that's looking at for something specific that they'd like to hear as well? All right, sounds like we got a great plan.
All right.
Okay. And this is on to section 9, which is reports. Any reports from the commission? Let's start with email.
What was that? I'm sorry.
Any reports for the general good from you?
I haven't had anything directed my way to report, so. I've been kind of out of town with personal problem. I lost my brother
I'm sorry.
and down Elk Grove, and so I'm kind of executor of the estate down there. So I apologize for not being on top of things too much here. I'm getting some things done.
Understand. I'm sorry.
I don't have anything. Thank you, Bill.
Bill?
I think the last meeting, there wasn't a quorum, so it was canceled. Are we gonna bring those topics that were on the agenda?
That's what we did, we just moved it to tonight.
Wasn't there the tribal casino, or was that different?
That was an informational, I can talk about it in my report.
Yeah, thanks.
I don't really have any report other than I'm not sure when the proper time to say this, but I would like to maybe get an agenda at some point in the future. I know we've talked a lot about things that kind of got brought up and addressed here and hadn't necessarily came back to us. I just was hoping we could find a way to kind of keep track of those so that we're all on the same page. And I don't know if it's just something that comes to us every month, or I don't do extra work for staff, but just a way for us to kind of keep an eye on what we talked about and has moved on to make sure it comes back to us.
Do you mean, like we talked about ADUs and you said you wanted an ordinance and like what the status is?
Yeah, I mean, I think it,
Okay.
and like I said, I don't want to do a bunch of more work for staff, 'cause I know there's a lot, but I know there was some talk, and I'm not sure if this came back. I was just going through some prior agendas, and there was like the animal ordinances that hadn't come back yet, and a few other things, and I just thought it'd be easier for everybody if we just had some type of checklist to make sure we're not missing something.
Yeah, just that, so like there was a couple of things I think back in 22, 23 that. I don't know if they ever progressed, like we approved them, passed them along, but did they come to conclusion with the council?
Exactly, that's exactly.
Cause I think if we bring something forward, it should be accepted by the council to make decision. Cause otherwise, what's the purpose of the body?
Correct, and we may miss some of those council meetings or decisions too, so it's nice to hear back from staff that, hey, on the June 5th meeting, the council approved
Okay,
whatever, you know. that
yeah, so
regular
like,
rat pack.
like an Excel sheet on February 1st, we recommended approval of general plan amendment, and on February 10th, the council said no, whatever.
Yeah, right, yeah, right.
That'd be awesome, so we have closure.
Yeah, we can do that.
Eric, anything else to report?
I do, just in response, the, from the last meeting, when Margaret, the city manager talked about the tribe. We did go before council and ask what they would like to do, and they did, authorize staff to do the meet and confer. So that is in process. Other than that, there's nothing else.
Thank you. So this meeting is adjourned at 7:22.